When it comes to the stage shows at the Disney parks, there are few as breathtaking as Fantasmic. From its use of incredible music, iconic animated films, and stunning special effects, it's truly an achievement in theme park entertainment. But the history and evolution of the Nighttime Spectacular, and how it came to be or what it almost was, is just as incredible. So sit back, relax, and let's take a deep dive into the creation of Fantasmic. The story begins in 1984 with Laserphonic Fantasy, a cutting-edge special effects show at Epcot Center, which took place on the World Showcase Lagoon. This was technically the third iteration of the show, which first began as Le Carnaval des Lumières in 1982, then A New World Fantasy in 1983. However, despite all of them featuring music, water, and lighting effects, Laserphonic Fantasy was the first to use laser graphic animations on water droplet screens. I know it doesn't sound like much, but back then it was a huge deal and drew in massive crowds to see this technical wonder. So it should be no surprise that over at Disneyland, they too wanted a water show spectacular to rival their East Coast Disney park. However, unlike Epcot Center's half-a-mile-wide lagoon, the only body of water even capable of hosting a show was the much smaller rivers of America. The solution was simple: utilize Tom Sawyer Island as a sort of theater stage, which closed to visitors at nightfall anyway. However, it seems this is about as far as the idea went before it was put on the back burner, more than likely due to funding issues.
Illumination, a nighttime orchestration of lasers, music, fireworks, and lights more dazzling than anything you've ever seen.
Fast forward to the debut of Illuminations in 1988, which was even more impressive and extravagant than its predecessors. It also featured an orchestrated score by composer Bruce Healey, complete with a brand new musical theme. But more importantly to this story, the success of Illuminations reignited the idea for a Rivers of America show at the Anaheim Park. And as easy as it is to constantly shit over Michael Eisner, he was the one who gave the official go-ahead to begin developing their own nighttime spectacular. The first idea to gain traction was a show called River Haunt, and was to be a sort of Haunted Mansion meets Frontierland / Pirates of the Caribbean hybrid. Now bear with me, because I have most of the visuals, but no descriptions. It began with a man and his dog, let's call them Silas and Dan, stumbling upon Tom Sawyer Island, or whatever it would have been called. Suddenly, a swarm of bats engulfed the platform and ghosts begin to materialize, scaring off poor Silas and Dan. It seems that the ghosts, again based on the images alone, decide to throw on a show for the audience. This begins with one or more musical numbers as the spirits dance the night away. Then there's the appearance of Madame Leota, and by far the most literal influence from the Haunted Mansion. It seems that she conjures up a ghost ship, which more than likely would have used the sailing ship Columbia. Then an epic battle takes place between the pirate ghosts and the Haunted Mansion ghosts. Again, I'm making a lot of assumptions here. Tom Sawyer Island then transforms into a dungeon as Silas discovers a bunch of skeletons, but sadly Dan is nowhere to be found. The ghosts materialize once again in what I can only assume is another elaborate musical number. Silas and the ghosts go through a bunch of shenanigans, with some haunted suits of armor joining in on the chaos. Silas then tries to hide under one of the blankets, but is discovered by a headless suit of armor. He's then forced into a coffin, which is lifted up into the air. Again, context would be really nice here. The coffin then proceeds to explode, but don't worry because it seems this was all part of a magic trick, or something, and Silas ends up running away. The finale of the show, or at least of what I have, seems to have been based around Frankenstein, Igor, and his monster. Frankenstein's monster accidentally knocks over some lab equipment and causes a massive fire to consume the stage. Then, honestly, I have no idea what is happening in these next images, but it seems the show ends with Dr. Frankenstein making all the ghosts disappear. I think.
I have one question, Dr. Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
It doesn't seem like this version of the River Show went much farther beyond the initial concept, but the next version would properly set the stage for the show that did become a reality, Fantasia Live. Evidently, Fantasia Live was to be just like the name implies, a live performance of Fantasia. This would have featured a floating stage with a live orchestra, with 3 massive movie screens to play clips of the Walt Disney classic. True, it doesn't seem all that impressive, and it might have become a reality if it hadn't been for a brand new innovation from France of all places. You see, up until then, laser projections were commonly used in water shows, such as those in Illuminations, but abstract shapes was about as far as it went. However, in 1989, a man by the name of Yves Pepin invented a new kind of projection effect altogether. Without getting too much into the technicalities, basically it was a way to project film clips onto water mist in the same way they're projected onto a screen. Coincidentally, that same year, a Disney show director and a research team were working on a Sleeping Beauty castle show. More specifically, it was intended for the park's 35th anniversary, and while the show itself never became a reality, the idea was to combine lasers and mist screens with live performers. So in a true case of serendipity, a demo of the new water projection technology just so happened to be sent to Disney, and between the abandoned castle show and Fantasia Live, Imagination was born.
Mickey Mouse's fantastic power of imagination is the premise for the biggest spectacular Disneyland has ever staged. The wonders of Mickey's fantastic imagination, the scope, the combination of special effects, the energy and emotion will amaze you. You have never seen anything like Imagination.
For Imagination, the idea of using Fantasia as a source of inspiration remained intact, but would also combine other Disney classics. There would also be appearances from Disney's most recent animations, as this was right in the middle of the Renaissance era, and many of the characters were already household names. Music, of course, was to be a major factor in tying these scenes together, so the composer of Illumination's Bruce Healey was brought into the project. The iconic Disney villains would also play a major part in the second half of the show. This included Ursula in the form of a massive articulated figure. There would also be projections from the Fantasia sequence A Night on Bald Mountain. Evidently, this was initially going to feature live actors as glow-in-the-dark skeletons, but it seems this concept was eventually abandoned. The most prominent villain, however, was to be Maleficent, who would transform into a gigantic dragon as part of the show's climax. As initially envisioned, the dragon was a fully fleshed-out animated figure with flapping wings and moving body parts, a true representation of the infamous creature from Sleeping Beauty. Unfortunately, due to logistical problems, the full-body dragon was eventually reduced to, well, basically just a mechanical head on a cherry picker.
Very soon, Disneyland will be opening a new attraction. It's a sensational mixture of music, magic, and special effects that will take you on a trip beyond your imagination.
How about a sneak preview?
Well, it's still under construction.
In September of 1991, construction began on Imagination, and the Rivers of America was drained. But Imagination wasn't just a name used by the creative team, it was advertised and promoted as the official name of the show. However, this was eventually changed to Fantasmic as Disney realized they couldn't trademark the name Imagination, because, you know, money and merchandising. Part of the transformation of Tom Sawyer Island was the construction of a new cider mill, which was built to blend into the surrounding landscape. In reality, this was actually part of the stage, which also had a hidden basement that was the special effects nerf center and control room. As far as how much all of this was costing, initially the show had a budget of $15 million. However, by the end of construction, it's reported that Fantasmic ended up costing a whopping $30 million. And just for comparison, the original Star Tours attraction just a few years earlier cost about $32 million, so the investment into Fantasmic was less of a typical show and more like an attraction. And to build up hype for this new nighttime spectacular, a gigantic 8-story tall inflatable Maleficent figure was taken on a 28-city tour across America.
It's fantasy. It's frightening. Be there when the night ignites.
With the slogan of "Be There When the Night Ignites," the first media preview of Fantasmic was originally scheduled for April 29th of 1992. However, in a tragic case of bad timing, April 29th was the very same day of the Rodney King trial, in which the officers involved in the attack were found not guilty. Within just hours of the verdict, riots erupted all over Los Angeles, with many stores, vehicles, and property set on fire. So the media event was quickly rescheduled, with any traces of the slogan, which was already being used to promote the grand opening, pulled from advertising.
Now gather and grace the Fantasmic premiere!
Fantasmic officially opened on May 15th of 1992 and was an immediate success, drawing in record crowds and giving the park a significant boost in ticket sales. The original idea was to keep Fantasmic as is for 5 years, and then consider revamping the show with a new narrative and visuals. However, even 5 years in, crowds showed no signs of wavering, with each show consistently reaching maximum occupancy. Oh, and just as a quick fun fact, the gigantic inflatable Maleficent figure was kept around for a few years, such as advertising Mickey's Halloween party in the parking lot of Disneyland.
It's Disneyland's incredible new show, with music, fireworks, special effects. This is Fantasmic.
Fantasmic was by far the most ambitious theme park show ever created, so it makes sense that it saw more than its fair share of problems. For instance, the breathtaking moment when the dragon breathes fire was a big part of Fantasmic's promotion, but despite the sound effect being part of the soundtrack, the effect itself was fairly hit or miss in the early years of the show. Another reoccurring issue was with another icon of Fantasmic, the massive Ursula float. The problem was that she was a major pain in the tentacle to maintain, with frequent reports of her inflatable figure popping or tearing. Now, despite those who have said she was retired 2 years after the show began, based on my own personal research, while often hit or miss, she was still part of the show at least until December of 1997. That seems to be the final year she ever appeared, and was allegedly left to rot away in storage for over a decade.
Life's full of tough choices, isn't it?
Another almost abandoned part of the show were the Pinocchio marionettes. Evidently, these were also a major pain in the nose to operate, as they were essentially giant metallic puppets attached to boom risers. But the real problem was the hassle of retracting the giant but fragile figures after their performance, as within a matter of minutes, they had to be carefully lowered into the pit below the stage. But then there was the evening in which one of the suspension cables snapped, sending the massive figures crashing into the giant hole below. For almost a whole year, they disappeared from the show, with a rather lackluster replacement as the music played overhead. However, unlike Ursula, they did finally reappear, but with a slightly different rigging system to avoid a future incident. Now, before we dive into even more changes to the Disneyland version, it's time we move on over to Disney's MGM Studios in 1997, with the construction of the Hollywood Hills Amphitheater.
A magnificent battle between good and evil is coming to the Disney MGM Studios. It's Fantasmic, the new nighttime spectacular starting this fall.
You see, with Fantasmic's overwhelming popularity, it was a no-brainer decision to bring the show to Walt Disney World, but executives wanted to avoid the problem of Disneyland's version, which was a crowd-control nightmare on the banks of the rivers of America. So the Magic Kingdom Rivers of America was out of the question, and with Epcot already having illuminations, MGM Studios was chosen for the location of Fantasmic. It would also technically be the replacement of the park's current nighttime spectacular, Sorcery in the Sky. The amphitheater was built to hold around 10,000 visitors, and the stage itself was built to resemble a mountain range. The show would also feature additional heroes, villains, and scenes from the Disney animations released since the original Fantasmic. There was also going to be a major change to the grand finale. You see, promotional material for the original Fantasmic often showcased Mickey as Sorcerer Mickey, defeating Maleficent with his powers and standing on a rocky platform surrounded by water. Now, whether this was the original plan for the finale or just for promotional purposes, I'm not entirely sure. But either way, the Disney World version of Fantasmic was to bring to life this vision for the show's ending. Mickey would appear to walk on water while making his way to the middle of the lake, in a segment literally called Mickey Walks on Water, and destroy the dragon. However, allegedly the effect was proving to be a major hassle and was abandoned during the rehearsal stage. There's also a rumor that Michael Eisner was afraid of people comparing Mickey to Jesus. And just to squash the countless false information I've come across, this was never officially part of the show, as it was even absent from early cast member previews. It's also why there's such a long segment where Mickey awkwardly stomps around during such an epic musical swell, because this is when he would have been walking on water. After taking his good old sweet time, he does finally make it to the Sword in the Stone, and this is where he would have used his magical powers to destroy Maleficent. As far as the rest of the show, while the beginning and end were more or less the same as the Disneyland version, the rest was almost entirely different. On the plus side, using Jafar as an alternate version of Ska was a nice change from the original. However, replacing the iconic Peter Pan segment with a lengthy Pocahontas set piece was arguably its weakest deviation. But now it's time to jump back on over to Disneyland's version in 2009, because while Fantasmic had seen quite a few technical upgrades over the years, the biggest change was about to come in its almost 20-year history. As part of Disney's Summer Night-tastic, the original vision for the Maleficent Dragon that was abandoned so long ago would finally be realized. The event was to run June through August, and while it wasn't the only offering, or even the only update to Fantasmic, the new fully animatronic dragon was by far the most anticipated highlight. New Flotsam and Jetsam figures were also part of the new additions, sort of a long overdue replacement of the previously mentioned abandoned Ursula float. Unfortunately, while the two sinister eels appeared on schedule, behind-the-scenes technical and mechanical issues severely delayed the dragon, leading to a very awkward finale with the floating, non-dragon Maleficent. The highly anticipated dragon wasn't even installed until July, over a month behind schedule, but was planned to be ready by August. Unfortunately, even further technical issues caused it to miss the Summer Night-tastic event entirely. However, on September 1st, the dragon finally made its appearance and was truly a sight to behold. As far as the fate of the original Dragon Head, it was shipped to the Ronald Reagan Library in 2009 for a Disney theme park display, which I actually had the pleasure of seeing for myself. However, it seems both the dragon and Ursula eels had some sort of Disney curse, because both saw major problems. The most notable was the infamous dragon, who just 3 days shy of its first-year anniversary broke down mid-performance. So the dragon was taken out of commission and had to revert to its awkward ending with a floating Maleficent, but thankfully the dragon did finally return a few months later. As far as Flotsam and Jetsam, they were also incredibly problematic. Oftentimes they were a complete no-show due to technical issues, or when they did appear, would occasionally run into equipment or sometimes even each other. So the jet ski-powered Disney figures were given a complete redesign and returned to the show a few months later. But then one of the eels capsized mid-performance, and Disney ultimately decided to abandon them altogether.
Babies! My poor little poopsies.
2011 saw yet another incarnation of Fantasmic, but this time over at Tokyo DisneySea. To say the show saw drastic alterations from the original is an understatement, and there's honestly no point in going through all the changes since it was basically a completely different show entirely. However, speaking of the original, in 2016 the Rivers of America was drained once again in preparation for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. When Fantasmic made its return in July of 2017, much like Tokyo, it was almost a completely different show. Sure, the basic structure of the narrative was still familiar, but from the use of projection mapping, new show scenes, and even a new musical score, very little went unchanged. Heck, they even replaced Snow White and the Prince with Rapunzel and Flynn Rider, as Beauty and the Beast and the Little Mermaid are far more marketable. Some of what was now abandoned was at least given a tribute, such as the Pinocchio marionettes. But don't worry, Disney is keeping them safe and sound in their archives. For now. And if you're wondering why I haven't mentioned the changes to the Disney World version of Fantasmic, that's because there really haven't been any since it debuted almost 20 years ago. But I think that will change in the soon-ish future, but as to exactly what, we'll have to wait and see.